Okay, let's open to Deuteronomy chapter 5. Deuteronomy chapter 5. We've got a very long speech by Moses to cover tonight. It goes all the way through chapter 26. Obviously, we cannot cover every verse in these 22 chapters. But we can talk about some themes and some major ideas. You might have noticed, if you read through this, that there are a whole lot of specific laws that are given. A lot of them are situational type laws. If this happens, then here's what you do. There's a lot of that in this message from Moses. You might have read some of these laws and thought, well, that's kind of bizarre. Why is that the law? And if you did that, I did too. And if you have questions about those laws, I don't necessarily covet those. But if you want to bring it up and you want to ask about it, I'll give it my best shot. Okay? All right. Just a little bit of review. I want to make sure you're following where we are at this point in the story. Who is Moses preaching to in the book of Deuteronomy? And I don't want just Israelites. Yes, specifically though, describe the demographic of the people that he's preaching to.
60 and below.
I'm sorry?
60 and below.
Okay, people ages 60 and below. Okay, because the generation that was 20 and above wandered in the wilderness 40 years and had to die off. And so there would be some of those who were 19 and younger when the wilderness wanderings began, who are now, 50s, 60. And then the majority of the people, though, that he's preaching to, how old are they? Well, they're younger than 40. Okay? So most of the people that Moses is preaching to in Deuteronomy were not at Mount Sinai. That's really the key I want you to see. The majority of the people were not there. They've been born in the wilderness in the time since Sinai. Okay? And that's important because of what Moses says in the book of Deuteronomy. Much of what he says is a reminder of what was given 40 years prior at Sinai. So a lot of these in Moses' audience are being exposed to this information for the first time. Okay? Not all of them, but a lot of them. Okay. So in chapters 4 through 11, you're going to see a lot of repetition of this idea of follow the Lord, obey the Lord, don't turn to the right or to the left, follow his ways, do the things that God says, be sure you obey the Lord. Moses is going to say that like on repeat again and again. And then when you get to chapter 12 and you go on from there, you're going to get into a lot of these specific laws that, well, in this situation, here's how you handle that, and here's what you do if this happens, and so forth. So the themes that Moses is emphasizing in these chapters, 4 through 11, have to do with obedience to God. And it starts in chapter 5 with the retelling of the Ten Commandments. And you read those in verses 6 beginning down through 21. Okay, so Moses is going to start there. Let's start with the Ten Commandments because that's where it all started to begin with at Sinai in Exodus 20. So let's start there, and then all of the rest of the legislation that he either repeats Or some of Deuteronomy is new legislation that he is adding to. All of that finds its basis, its foundation in the Ten Commandments. So God gives them the Ten Commandments, which Moses reminds them of here in chapter 5. Now, I want to point out a couple of things about Deuteronomy 5. Read with me starting at verse 1. Moses summoned all Israel and said to them, "Hear, O Israel, the statutes and the ordinances which I am speaking today in your hearing, that you may learn them and observe them carefully. The Lord our God made a covenant with us at Horeb." Now, where is that? Verse 2, Horeb. What is that referring to? Yeah, good. Okay, that's Sinai. It's the same place, just different name. God made a covenant with us at Horeb. Verse 3, the Lord did not make this covenant with our fathers, but with us, with those who are alive here today. The Lord spoke to you face to face at the mountain from the midst of the fire, while I was standing between the Lord and you at that time to declare to you the word of the Lord, for you were afraid because of the fire and did not go up the mountain. And he said, "I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt in slavery," and so forth. I want to emphasize one thing in particular here, and then give you something else just to think about. Here's what I want to emphasize. The Lord our God made a covenant with us, Israelites. This is such a foundational point, but so often I hear Christians talk, I hear Christians say things that shows an ignorance of this fundamental point. The law of Moses was given to Israel. It was not given to Gentiles. The Lord our God made a covenant with us, Israelites. Okay? I really want to drill down on that. Because I've had Bible studies with people who are Gentiles, who are as non-Jewish as they come. And I hear them say things like, well, you know, back when we lived under the law of Moses. What? You've never lived under the law of Moses. You, if you are a Gentile, have never had anything to do with the law of Moses. And I know that that seems so basic, and it is. But listen, this is why this is important. A lot of our religious friends, they don't get this. They miss this. They will look back to Old Testament legislation and they'll use it to justify their worship practices, or they'll justify some other belief with that. They appeal to a law that they were never under. We have got to understand this point. The Lord our God made a covenant with us, Israelites. Not us, you and me. With Israel long ago. Gentiles never had anything to do with the law of Moses. Are we clear on that? Does that make sense? Okay, I know that seems basic, but a lot of folks miss this. And sometimes I even hear Christians say things like that. Well, back when we were under the law, life was so hard. Really? Wow. Life is hard under the law. That's why Christ brought something else. That's why he brought something better. Okay, something else I want to call your attention to. Moses says, the Lord did not make this covenant, verse 3, with our fathers. He's talking about the patriarchs there. Okay? He's talking about the patriarchs when he mentions the fathers. He's not talking about their literal, immediate, previous generation. Their fathers. Okay? Because God did make a covenant with their fathers, their earthly fathers, from a generation prior. He's talking here about Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. What happened at Sinai is a distinct event from the promises that were made to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, a covenant that was made with them. This that happened at Sinai to us, to Israelites, is distinct from that. Okay? And you see that borne out by the Apostle Paul in the book of Galatians. So I just wanted you to see that that's who the fathers that are under consideration there in verse 3. Okay, now, 10 Commandments, given, repeated, I should say, for the second time in chapter 5. And then in verses 22 through 33, Moses talks about, again, Sinai and God's presence and the cloud and smoke and thunder and how awesome that was and how frightening that was for the Israelites. Then he comes into chapter 6 and he gives the greatest commandment. The Lord our God, the Lord is one, and you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Chapter 6, verses 4 through 6. Then he talks about the importance of teaching his commandments to our children and our children's children. And you remember that passage. When you stand up, when you lie down, when you walk by the way, when you're on the treadmill, when you're doing this and that. Talk to your kids about the scriptures, okay? All right, then in chapter 7, commands about driving out the Canaanite nations that are before them. I do want to look at this with you. Chapter 7, and I'm going to, I got a slide behind here, I apologize. We're going to pick up right here. Destroy the people of the land and their idols. Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 2. Listen, I'm going to go really fast tonight, so holler at me if you have a comment or a question, okay? Chapter 7, verse 2. When the Lord your God delivers them before you, that's all the nations mentioned in verse 1, and you defeat them, then you shall utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them and show no favor to them. Furthermore, you shall not intermarry with them. You shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor shall you take their daughters for your sons. For they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will be kindled against you, and he will quickly destroy you. But thus you shall do to them. Tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, hew down their asherim, and burn their graven images with fire. All right, any questions about what they're supposed to do when they go into the land of Canaan? I mean, that seems pretty clear, right? Totally destroy, annihilate. Don't leave anything behind. These are God's instructions to the people. If you don't, what's the warning? What will happen if you let them hang around and you let your sons marry their daughters and their sons marry your daughters, or however I need to say that? What's the warning? They will turn you against me, and you will bear judgment for that. That's right. Kelly, did you have your hand up? Yes. Yes. Where are you going with this, Kelly? Are you advocating a new ladies' hairstyle?
If they're supposed to just completely annihilate the people, then why is there a rule about what to do with this woman that you have?
Oh, okay. I see your question. Yeah, so there's a lot of evidence to think that rule applies beyond the Canaanites. Okay? So in a time when Israel is involved in wars and battles with non-Canaanite nations, there will be other enemies that they will fight in the future, and so this is to be the perpetual practice. Okay? Yeah, good question. All right, what else? Okay, now, did the Israelites do what they were told to do in Deuteronomy 7? Did they utterly destroy, wipe them out entirely? No, they didn't. And we're going to see that when we come into Joshua and Judges next quarter. Okay? Things started off really good. Early in the book of Joshua, the Israelites are just mowing everybody down. But they got a little bit lax on that, and this warning that God gave them here, it came true. Look at chapter... We've already talked about some things in chapter 8 and 9. Just by way of quick reminder, chapter 8, God talks about how he cared for them as they were in the wilderness. So verse 2 mentions that God led them 40 years. He was testing them to know their heart, whether they would keep his commandments or not. Verse 3, he humbled you and he let you be hungry, but he fed you with manna. He says that, verse 3, I should just read the whole verse because this will be familiar. He might make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of God. Does that ring a bell? Say yes. Okay, good. Verse 4, your clothing did not wear out on you. Your foot did not swell these 40 years. I mean, think about how many steps they walked all of these years, right? And what a physical toll that would have taken on your body. Verse 7, the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs, flowing forth in valleys and hills, a land of all these good things, right? Wheat, barley, vines, fig trees, pomegranates, really good coffee. Wait, why are you laughing? Is that not in your translation? Okay. So, here's the warning. Verse 10, when you have eaten and are satisfied, you should bless the Lord your God for the good land which he has given you. Beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and ordinances and statutes. Otherwise, you have eaten and you're satisfied. You've come in and you've lived in these houses that you didn't build, and you're drawing water from wells you didn't dig. Don't think that you did it. God gave you this by his grace, and you should be obedient and thankful to him. Chapter 9, we talked about a little bit on Sunday. God did not choose you because you were better than all the other nations. You're just as terrible as everybody else on the earth. You're just as wicked and sinful. But God chose you because of promises that were made to Abraham and the unfolding of his story. Okay, there's a lot of things that we've already talked about. Moses is reminding us of here. So go over to chapter 12. Go over to chapter 12. I know we're in fifth gear. It's going to stay that way tonight, unfortunately. Chapter 12, something I want to just emphasize that's repeated here. Chapter 12, verse 2 is a repeat of the instruction from chapter 7. Utterly destroy all the places where the nations whom you shall dispossess serve their gods, on the high mountains, on the hills, under every green tree. Notice just this subtle difference. Destroy the Canaanites' places of worship. Not just destroy the Canaanites and everything that they possess. Don't even leave behind, bless you, their places of worship. Get rid of those. And he's going to tell us why in this chapter. If you look at verse 3, you shall tear down their altars, smash their pillars, burn their Asherim with fire, cut down the engraved images of their gods, and obliterate their name from that place. You shall not act like this toward the Lord your God. But you shall seek the Lord at the place which the Lord your God will choose. Verse 10. When you cross the Jordan and live in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, and he gives you rest from all your enemies all around you, that you live securely, then it shall come about that the place in which the Lord your God will choose for his name to dwell, there you shall bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings, sacrifices. Again, the place that God chooses, not just some random place where you want to, not the place that the Canaanites worshipped their gods. The place which the Lord your God chooses is where you will worship. Verse 13, be careful that you do not offer your burnt offerings in every cultic place you see. That is, the Canaanite places that they would leave behind. But in the place which the Lord chooses in one of your tribes, there you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do all that I command you. You see that emphasis on the place of worship. Okay? I want you to be thinking about John chapter 4 and that woman at the well. What was she saying to Jesus? You Jews say that where is the place where worship is to be done? Jerusalem, because that's the place that God chose. Okay? All right, good. Chapter 13. There will be people who are false prophets who try to turn you away from God. Don't listen to those people. If a prophet comes and says we should pursue other gods, even if that prophet says something that comes true, don't listen to that prophet. Deuteronomy chapter 18 is going to show us this. But generally speaking, how would you know if a prophet was a true prophet or a false prophet? If he makes a prophecy, a prediction, and it comes true, that's how you know he's a true prophet. But here, Moses says, yeah, but even if a man does that and his prophecy comes true, if he's telling you to follow other gods, you know he's not a true prophet. Stone that man to death. Joe?
Good example is Balaam. He spoke and what he was saying was from God, but we know immediately after.
Yeah, good. The story of Balaam, right, where Balak wanted him to curse Israel, and he just couldn't do it. Every time he opened his mouth, God made a blessing come out instead of a curse. And so, even though Balaam was blessing Israel, we know he was not a genuine prophet who is seeking to promote God's will. Okay, good example. It's not just a false prophet, though, who might wander into your town. Beginning at verse 6, Moses says, even if one of your family members, if your brother or your sister or your spouse says, hey, we should follow after other gods, Moses says, show them no mercy. Because they're telling you to do things that you know are absolutely wrong. Chapter 14, verse 1, you are the sons of the Lord your God. You shall not cut yourselves, nor shave your forehead for the sake of the dead. Those seem to be some religious cultic practices that the Canaanites would do. And Moses is saying, yeah, we don't do that. We don't worship like them. Okay? Not only do we not worship the gods that they worshiped, we don't worship in the places that they worshiped, we don't follow the same practices that they practiced. And verse 2 is the key. You are a holy people to the Lord your God, and the Lord has chosen you to be a people for his own possession out of all the peoples who are on the face of the earth. I had a thought today as I was reading through this, and I don't know if there's anything to this or not, but I'm going to say it as if there is, right? Because, be confident, right? You keep seeing this expression, the Lord your God, the Lord your God, the Lord your God. I wonder is that Moses' way of saying to the people, you are special. This is the Lord your God, the God of Israel. This is the God of Abraham. He's your God. He's not everybody else's. Not in the same way that he is yours. You with me? I don't know that that's what the idea is, but I do see this expression a lot in the Old Law, and particularly in these speeches in Deuteronomy. I wonder if Moses is just emphasizing, you're a holy people to God, but God is yours in a way that he's not anybody else's. Now, that doesn't mean that God doesn't care about other nations or, let them wander aimlessly with no direction. No, God sent prophets to other nations, right? Jonah and Nahum went to the Assyrians and preached to them, and God showed compassion on other nations. But Israel was his, and he was theirs. The Lord your God. Okay, I heard a voice. Kyle.
Well, it goes along with what you said earlier about Moses telling them about the law being delivered to them. It was
Yeah, it's their law. Yeah. Okay.
Same idea.
Good.
The law,
Good. Dad?
I think it also goes back to what Jesus called the Shema, that your God is one. He is the only God.
Yeah.
You see that over and
And you see that same expression, though. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, all your strength. Okay, good. All right. I'm going to skip over 15 just for the sake of time. Go to chapter 16. You understand I'm not skipping 15 because there's nothing good in 15. It's not that. Just time. We got to keep it moving. Chapter 16 is about feast days that the people are to observe. And I want to start in verse 16, and then we'll go back and just mention these things that are summarized here in 16 and 17. 3 times in a year all your males shall appear before the Lord your God in the place which he chooses, at the feast of unleavened bread, and at the feast of weeks, and at the feast of booths. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty-handed. Every man shall give as he is able, according to the blessing of the Lord your God, which he has given you. So there are several feast days of the Jews, several religious festivals of the Jews, but 3 of them come with a requirement for the males to travel to the place that the Lord your God chooses, which will become Jerusalem. Okay? Those are listed in verse 16 as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But remember, when you read Feast of Unleavened Bread, what should you associate with that? Passover. Yeah, Passover was 1 day, and it was immediately followed by the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which was 7 days. So this is really a week-long festival. So Feast of Unleavened Bread / Passover, okay? And that's discussed beginning in chapter 16 and verse 1. Then in verse 9, you shall count 7 weeks for yourself. You shall begin to count 7 weeks from the time you begin to put the sickle to the standing grain. Then you shall celebrate the Feast of Weeks. So verses 9 through 12 talks about this feast, which was 7 weeks after Passover. And then verses 13 through 17 discusses the Feast of Tabernacles, which was a 7-day celebration at the end of the harvest season, where the people would make booths or tents or temporary shelters to live in for that week. And those 3 times, the males are supposed to travel to Jerusalem for these feast days. Okay? All right. Chapter 17. Here's where we start to get into some of the specific legal scenarios and situations that could come up. And in a general way, when Moses is talking here about what is fair and what is just, in verses 8 through 13, he talks about if there is a case that's too difficult to decide, bring that to the Levitical priests and let them offer their judgment. Presumably these are leaders, these are wise men who know the law, who are capable of speaking to all of these different situations. So, chapter 18 now, after talking about, hey, bring your difficult cases to the priests, well, now you come into chapter 18 and he continues talking about the Levites in verses 1 through 8 and the portion that's given to them. They have no land inheritance in the land of Canaan. Remember, we talked about the 48 cities that the Levites would live in, scattered throughout all the tribes. But the people were to bring their tithes and their offerings, and from those proceeds, the Levites would have their food and housing and such provided for. Now, verse 9, we go back to this Canaanite idea. Chapter 18, verse 9, when you enter into the land which the Lord your God gives you, you shall not learn to imitate the detestable things of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through fire, that is, human sacrifice, or one who uses divination, one who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, one who casts a spell, a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord, and because of these detestable things, the Lord your God is driving out the inhabitants of the land before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. Okay, again, we don't do what they do. Okay, you keep seeing that over and over again. Remember the golden calf. The Israelites did what the Egyptians did. Moses says, don't make that mistake again. You will not worship in the abominable ways that these nations worship. Oh, let's see. No, I'm going to go back. Okay, let's stay in chapter 18. Let's talk about verses 15 through 22. Moses says, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your countrymen, and you shall listen to him. This is according to all that you asked of the Lord your God in Horeb on the day of the assembly, saying, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord God. Let me not see this great fire anymore, or I will die. You remember that? Moses, you go talk to God, and we'll listen to what you have to say. You go be God's messenger to us. If we hear God speak directly, he's going to kill us. It's just overwhelming. So Moses says, that's what you asked. You asked for me to be a messenger, and throughout the future, God will send you more messengers. Men will be prophets from among your own selves, and they will bring God's messages to you. Now, in Acts chapter 3, that verse that we just read together, verse 15, is quoted. Acts 3, verse 22, it's quoted and it's applied to Jesus. Jesus was the greatest of all the messengers, all the prophets that God sent. He was the greatest one of all. This passage, though, in Deuteronomy 18 is not limited in its application to Jesus. It is ultimately fulfilled in him as the greatest prophet. But what's said in these verses apply to all the men who would be prophets sent from God to his people. Okay. In chapter 22, we get into some various randomly placed, it seems, laws. Just a smattering of all kinds of different topics that are discussed in chapter 22. Among them, given considerable treatment, are situations of adultery and sexual sin. There's some bizarre laws, though, that are given. Verse 11, for instance, you shall not wear a material mixed of wool and linen together. Look at the tag of the shirt that you're wearing right now, and it's going to have 3 or 4 different kinds of materials. What exactly is the problem with that? I'm not certain. I've read some things about that. It all seems kind of arbitrary to me, the explanations that are given. I don't mean God's law is arbitrary. I'm sure he has great reasons for it. I'm just not sure what it is. But there's some other laws that are given in this chapter and in others that make a lot more sense to me. Verses 17 and 18 of chapter 23 talks about Israelites are not to serve as temple prostitutes. Again, that's a Canaanite thing. That's an ancient religious practice. Don't do that, okay? The discussion of the first fruits as offerings given to God is in chapter 26. I want to make sure we close with chapter 26, verses 16 through 19. This is the summary, the conclusion of this speech of Moses. Chapter 26, 16 through 19. This day the Lord your God commands you to do these statutes and ordinances. You shall therefore be careful to do them with all your heart and with all your soul. Please connect that to chapter 6. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Okay? Moses didn't forget about that. He reminds us of that again. Verse 17. You have today declared the Lord to be your God, and that you would walk in his ways and keep his statutes, his commandments, and his ordinances, and listen to his voice. The Lord has today declared you to be his people, a treasured possession, as he promised you, and that you should keep all his commandments, and that he will set you high above all nations which he has made for praise, fame, and honor, and that you shall be a consecrated people to the Lord your God, as he has spoken. Okay, this goes back to the idea that I expressed earlier. The Lord your God. He is their God. They're his people. Moses emphasized. But what did God want for the people? He wanted them, verse 19, to enjoy praise, fame, and honor, that they would be consecrated as his people, and the whole world would recognize how blessed Israel was as a nation. That's what God wanted. But that is not what happened. Not at all.